Welcome to Forever Wild, a podcast about family, memories, and the stories that shape who we become. I'm Meagan McGovern. I'm the oldest of the four McGovern girls.
And I'm Nora Gibbs, the youngest and most beautiful of the four girls. Together, we're sharing our journey growing up with an actor father, a mother who didn't believe that the rules of society applied to her when it came to financial matters, and a childhood full of chaos and adventure. And I like to say that where you come from matters because it helps determine where you're going.
In every episode, we tell some stories, we probably overshare, and we see if we can find some lessons out of all of this.
Thanks for joining us. This is Forever Wild.
All right, so in the first episode that we did, we talked about Mom's obituary and about it going viral, and we talked a little bit about her life. Her name was Maureen McGovern, and she raised the four of us pretty much on her own. When my father left when we were 10, and even before he left, it was kind of a chaotic upbringing, but with some kind of stability, some kind of normal. But at some point, once he left, all of the wheels came off and the adventure went everywhere. I call it the adventure. I don't know what to call it.
The adventure.
Yeah, the adventure begins. We were on the road, on and off, from the time my dad left until there was never any real stability. I don't think we ever lived in a house more than, it was the longest we lived somewhere.
6 months, maybe?
No, I think we lived on Raymer Street, one of our houses, for a year and a half, 2 years. But that's over the entire course of the life from my 10 to 20 or 10 to 18 or whatever it was. I don't think we lived any. Some of the houses were 3 months, some were 6 weeks, some were in hotels. It was pretty chaotic. And so I don't know what you call those years. I don't want to call them, I don't know, whatever. This is how it all started.
Childhood. That was just our childhood.
Yes. But there is a divide, a before and after.
Right.
And because I'm 6 years older than Nora, I remember the before. This was my childhood up until 10, and then it was not. And I think my dad left when Nora was 4, so she has very different memories than I do.
For sure.
So today I think we're going to start with how this all began and some of the background on my mother about how we started off on this endless parade of houses and moving from place to place and chaos and schemes and scams and all sorts of things. So we're going to rewind. So Nora, why don't you tell me what you know?
So when we read the obituary and wrote the obituary, it was really interesting. A lot of people were very interested when the word mafia came up and how my parents owned a bar in New York City in Greenwich Village. So we're going to go back to the 60s. We're going to go back to when Maureen and Dawn, when they ran the marketplace in East Village. It wasn't their bar. The bar, turns out, and I'm just learning about this now, it's actually kind of interesting. The bar was a Mafia Bar. And I know that in the original obituary, it said it was the corner bistro. I was very sad to learn that it was not the corner bistro. It's called the marketplace in East Village. So Megan's going to tell us a lot about the chaos that ensued when you own a bar that's run by the mafia. Probably not the best business idea, or maybe it is. I don't know. Let's see what happens.
So a lot of this is pieced together stories because Mom talked a little bit about this. She would say, well, when your father was stabbed in the kidneys by the mafia, and she made a big deal out of the fact that he showed up on her doorstep one night at 2:00 in the morning with a stab wound and talked a lot about it, but she didn't really go into what that meant. She just said they ran a bar. And I didn't know a lot of this until years and years later. And I finally got a copy of a letter. And I think I got the letter after my mom died. And the letter was written in 1972. And it was about things that happened in 1963, 1964. So we're talking things that happened 55 years ago. But it's all still interesting stories. And as Nora says, everybody loves mafia stories in New York City in the 60s. But this is also an interesting way to explain why my mother was who she was and also what she was capable of. Because when we were little, we didn't know what was truth and what was fiction. And my mother would have pretended, at least sworn, that she was a law-abiding citizen who never stole anything from anybody. So I got this letter, and it was from my father's first wife. And I don't know how much I've talked about this before, but we didn't know that my father was married before. We didn't know my father had a kid. We didn't know any of this. My mother and father kept this completely secret. I remember when I was my parents got married when I was in first grade. And I remember,
I was 6 weeks old at my parents' wedding.
no, yeah, but you don't remember it. I remember it. And I remember talking to one of my, I remember talking to somebody at school about it. And my mother said, don't tell anybody we're getting married. And I said, okay, why should I not tell anybody you're getting married? She said, well, we originally got married at a justice of the peace years ago. We've been married this whole time. I don't want anybody to think you were born out of wedlock.
I feel like she was lying.
I think he was still married to his wife this whole time, and we had no idea.
Yeah.
And so, for whatever reason, that's the kind of background we had, that we didn't know anything. So we finally found out that my father had been married before, and he had a son named Donald McGovern Jr. that he abandoned. And later on, we ended up becoming friends with Donnie, and we talked to him, and we got all of this information from him, who,
Shout out to Donnie. Hey, Donnie.
yeah, shout out to him. He sees my mother in a very different light than we do. He doesn't see her as his mom. We see her as my mom. He sees her as the woman who ran off with my father and left me abandoned as a 3-year-old, had 4 kids, and kept me secret from them. So
I got to spend a long weekend with Donnie and his mother, Marilyn, and our dad in New York City when I was like 16 years old. And his mother was fantastic. Marilyn was an artist, and she was just this wonderful, tiny little thing. And she had this fantastic apartment overlooking, what's the name of that park? I can't remember what the arch is.
Washington Square Park.
Washington Square Park. It's just beautiful little apartment. And yeah, but she was very kind. She was very sweet. And I could never imagine her being with someone like that. But sorry, I digress.
No, that's all right. So all I know about this is that Marilyn wrote this letter in 1972 to try to put together how bad it was and what the mess was that our parents left behind when they left New York City because of the mafia and because of all of this. So because of her openness with this and telling all of this, we have this story that's incredible, really. So she says in 1964, my dad was a stage manager at Lincoln Center. That's what he did. He wanted to be an actor, but he got also involved in stage managing and theater and behind the scenes stuff. And he was good at it. And so at that point, she said she had a 2-year-old, and he left Lincoln Center, and instead he decided to open a bar. And so he wanted to open up a neighborhood bar, and he got some funding from an actress. And so it was going to be a really cool acting bar. And I think it ended up, all of her friends were putting money into it. And it was some actress he was sleeping with, she says, called Ketty.
She famous?
Well, I think her name is Ketty Fringe or something like that. And she says she was an actress or a playwright or something else. And I don't know who that was. But whoever it was, she ended up putting a lot of money into the bar. And my dad's first wife, Marilyn, she said that this lady put something like $70,000 into the bar, which is a huge amount of money for 1964. But then my dad would come home, she says, and talk about how he's swindling this lady and about how he had her all sewn up and about how he's never going to give her back money. And so Marilyn, of course, didn't like this, and they fought. And she says, I don't know exactly how or when the mafia moved in. Sometime that winter, Dawn started talking about loan sharks, and I got the impression that he borrowed money from them, and it was a can't lose operation, and we fought about that too. All right. So in this letter, she talks about the name of the mafia people.
I would like to interject real quick that $70,000 in 1964 is $712,000.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a lot of money. I mean, if you're into the mafia for $700,000, that's a lot of money. So in this letter, she names...
Wait, was he for mafia for that, or was he into the actress? Is that how much the actress...
This is to, well, I guess it was probably to the actress first, and then it went into the mafia. I don't even know how much went into who went into what. But so here's the thing.
There was $70,000 invested in a bar.
All right. So my dad, on his deathbed, would not tell us the name of the mafia people he was involved with. And in this letter, it says it. And then my dad did tell me on his deathbed when he was literally dying and said, you must swear to never tell anybody this. This
You
is
are not allowed to say my name.
okay. So am I allowed to say the name on the podcast? This is 60 years later. Is somebody going to come after us?
You are not allowed to. If somebody's interested in who it is, they are welcome to call you, and I will give them your phone number, and you can tell them on the phone. You are not allowed to say it.
Okay, fine. Anyway, I don't even know who the mafia was or if this guy was famous or not. But so Marilyn says she was terrified of the mafia. She didn't want to be around it, but they had a great grand opening, and it was supposed to be a gay bar with all of the theater friends. But then the mafia showed up too, and no one really knew what kind of bar it was going to be. There was a lot of fighting. She said they hired a chef named Robert from Canada.
You mean Bob?
It was what? Bob. Yeah, Bob from Canada. And it turned out he was a thief. So my dad told her at one point that Robert had stolen several Rembrandts from a private museum in or near Boston. So
this is insane to me. Like, this is the first time I'm really hearing this whole story. And I can't wrap my head around this happening.
I don't understand why there's a chef in New York City who's stealing Rembrandts. I don't understand.
A personal chef to someone. I mean, I don't want to speculate, but I'm assuming that's how this happens. Working down dinner at someone's house, it's all of them. I mean,
maybe. I don't know. But she says that at some point, Robert stole the Rembrandts and that my dad showed her photos of the Rembrandts. And they were in some private museum. So I don't know whether that means a person's house or where they were. But my dad had the paintings in the basement of the marketplace. And he wanted to bring them to their apartment. And she said they fought like crazy over it. And she said, I told him to get rid of the paintings or I'm going to go to the police. And he said that if Marilyn wouldn't support him, then his girlfriend would. Well,
was that mom?
Yeah. She said that was an understatement. She said, I was becoming aware that he was involved with Maureen Smith, who was ostensibly his barmaid at the marketplace. More on that later. So yeah, that was mom.
Barmaid.
And a barmaid. And she said, if I hadn't been aware it was a mafia operation before the opening, I was that night. It was 100% mafia turnout.
Wow.
That one of them had managed to get some of the chic showbiz friends there. They were supposed to have been the one the place was designed for, and the hoods turned them off right away and vice versa. So it was a private opening with a sort of demonstration dinner that turned out to be pretty good. But after dinner, the chic crowd got the hell out and left the place to the goons and their ladies, which I think is fantastic that somebody's using the word goons, because I didn't think that was a real word that people use.
Goons and ladies. That's what goons and ladies.
And she said there was all sorts of stuff, that it was decided to turn the bar into a strictly gay bar. And this was before the law was really changed. And after that, the bar kept being busted all the time. And she said, I remember the first time I got a phone call from someone who said I was a policeman at 4 a.m, telling me that my husband had been arrested for possession of narcotics. And I told him there had to be a mistake because I knew perfectly well that Don was rabid on the subject and would have nothing to do with narcotics. I did not believe it. He should check his records again. And she said, I ruined their fishing expedition. And the police officer called me back to say I sounded so certain and it was somebody else, that Don was arrested, but they were only charged with maintaining a disorderly bar or something. And she said, nobody really knew what was going on. I don't understand why the law was involved. I don't understand what the police wanted, but he came home less and less. And anyway, after all of that, it just became clear that my father was more and more involved with the mafia and the money, and there was loan sharking, and there was something going on, credit cards and with fraud, and that all of this, my mother is becoming more and more involved with my father at this point. And my mother apparently decided that the first wife or the wife should be gotten off of the scene and arranged for Marilyn and her son, Donnie, to move into an apartment on Staten Island. And, but they wrote a bad check for that apartment. And after my mom and dad left for California, poor Marilyn found out that the check for the deposit and the first month's rent was bounced, and that she was stuck in an apartment with a 2-year-old, that they didn't have first month, last month, the second month's rent, anything. There was no money, and they had just left them. There were 4 months in arrears. And He said that he told her that he was leaving to go to California to get rid of my mom. He was going to dump her in LA. Of
And then
course,
he just fell in love with California instead.
I don't know, but I know he always used to say he was trying to get rid of her. He used to say she was a one night stand that lasted 20 years.
Yeah, that was his
And
famous.
and so I can't imagine. And what was he going to do with her in California? Kill her? Drop her off? Just leave her on the beach? I mean, anyway, I think they were in super credit card debt. There was a whole bunch of stuff. And so the kicker to all this is that after they left, after they went to California, Marilyn gets a letter in the mail that there's a bill from B. Altman's for $300. And there's also,
The Old Bands was a department store in New York City in the 60s, correct?
yeah, I think so. And then there was another one from Bloomingdale's. So she said right after they left, the B. Altman bill comes to a head, and there's threatening phone calls from the collections agency with several $100s in her name. And I was threatened with an arrest for fraud. And I finally she said she had to call a lawyer and ask him for help. And it turns out, and Nora will like this because I don't think she's heard all of this yet, that she looked into it. There were 33 department stores involved with a total of $66,000 run up in Marilyn's name.
Wow.
All right. If
So they have
70,000,
populations, I'm thinking that's what, $600,000?
yeah, if 70,000 was 700,000, so it's the $650,000. So in addition to the 700,000,
Like I can spend a lot of money, but that's a lot of credit cards.
well, and 33 department stores, like how much time does she
Like,
have
where
on her
did the
hands?
money go? I guess that's my question also. Where did 600 grand go?
Well, I don't think she got cash out of it. I think she got clothes. And God, I kind of remember Dad saying something about it, that he had some kind of thing where she would come home with designer clothes or something and the mafia would sell them. I don't know. But
Okay,
so
that
Marilyn,
makes- if you're partnering with the mafia and you steal clothes and then the mafia sells them and gives you some of it, they're not going to give you half, right? It's the mafia. You're going to get
right, you're just doing it for them.
probably
You're an employee. You're not,
they're getting 500. Yeah.
yeah. She said one of the stores had become suspicious of Mr. and Mrs. McGovern and had tailed them. And there were some really good pictures of Mrs. McGovern, and they described to her lawyer as blonde and very heavy, which my mother was blonde and very heavy at the time. And Marilyn was 110 pounds and tiny and dark haired. And so she cooperated with the police, and she told them, obviously, their ex-husband or husband and this girlfriend of his had run all of this up. And she said, Dad called her and I told him what was happening. And he said, oh, I never worried about you getting into trouble because you're innocent. And we ran away because everybody's after us, good guys and black guys. And I'm running away with her because she's blackmailing me. And I think I'm going to murder her.
He said that about mom.
Yeah, he said, I think that he said he was seriously considering murdering her. So Marilyn said, forget it, that you're a perfect team and they deserved each other.
Good for
And
her.
you won't?
Yeah. Good for Marilyn. You know, I mean, honestly, if my husband left me for some barmaid, then whatever. Good for her.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So he said that, I guess Dad told her that there was a meeting at the Copacabana. I didn't think Copacabana was a good. I didn't think that was a real place, but apparently there was a meeting at Copacabana with the boys.
Hang out. That was like a whole thing.
I guess it was because there was a meeting to discuss how the marketplace should be run. And they were being busted regularly as a gay bar. And they wanted it to stay open and be run as a bust out gay bar until they could get everything out of it that they could.
I
And
do have one funny story. I did talk to Aunt Maggie about the bar and what she remembered about it. And she said that there was, and I'm not going to name their names because I don't know, they're very famous, but there was a very famous singer who used to frequent the marketplace and she used to see him there all the time. And he was one of the Jersey boys. He was one of the guys that sang, you know, one of the big printers in the 60s. And his driver at the time, his limo driver was, I'll just say, one of the main actors from Goodfellas, the Mafia. And I'll leave it at that.
You know, it's not really fair to do this and not name names. But
Or Joe Pesci used to be a driver. That's all I'm
okay,
going to say.
fine.
I love you, Joe.
I don't think he's going to be mad that we mentioned that he used to drive someone in New York City. Anyway, so But this is apparently what actually happened is my dad said they were going to close the bar. He got heavy about it and they invited him into the men's room for a private word and he got stabbed in the kidney and he was beaten badly. One eye was closed. His face looked like he'd been worked over. He told everyone he had been in a car wreck.
Well, he used to tell me, and he told me at work this all the time, that he thought he was going to die and he had been stabbed. And the only reason he lived was because there was a homeless person. There was a bum at the door. He used to say, a bum saved my life. A bum was banging on the door of the bathroom, trying to get in there to use the bathroom. And he was so persistent trying to get in the bathroom that they ended up leaving him bleeding to death in the bathroom. And they left, and the bum walked in. It was like, what the fuck happened to you?
That's pretty funny.
So a bum saved his life.
I mean, Mom said he showed up on her door at 3 a.m. with the wounds. And Marilyn says he was staying with Maureen and he didn't want Johnny and me to see him like that. And I insisted he came home and finally did. And she said she made him go to St. Vincent's for tetanus shots and stitches. And she said that night, the mafia guy, and I can't say his name, came over and we tried to smooth everything over. And from that point on, he left. And Don said he had been in the wrong. He had just gotten out of line. He hadn't showed respect toward the guy and that the guys had no choice. And it said the bar continued to be run as a bust out bar until it closed down 11 months after it opened. So all that fucking money,
So all that happened at 11 months.
Yeah. And like $700,000 into the bar. That's the equivalent of 700 plus that much money in all of the clothes they stole. So we're talking about $1.5 million.
Wow.
And the bar's closed in 11 months. And it said the marshal came up to claim everything on the premises. And Dawn brought over to the apartment the table, 8 chairs, a church pew, a chandelier, all the kitchen stuff.
Ooh, I wish I could.
I know. He said he even brought over the liquor license framed as a souvenir. And
all right, Donnie, if you're listening to this, I'm going to need that church pew and the liquor license.
And anyway, that's all I know. But that's how they ended up in California. And so when we were growing up, to them,
had they been to California before? Either of them before that? The one went to college in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think Mom had been to San Francisco. I don't think either of them had ever been to LA, but
I'm just curious how they ended up.
Because Mom wanted Dad to be a famous actor.
Okay. That makes sense.
Dad was really handsome and a really good actor. He was really talented and really good at it.
But he was also talented with his job as a crew chief, as a set director, as that type of thing as well. So if you're not acting and you can't, it's a good place to live if you need a side job.
He's also didn't want to be famous. He liked theater. He liked craft. He liked the story. And he had a self-destructive streak. He didn't want to be famous. But Mom wanted him to be famous. She thought he wasn't pushing himself hard enough. And, you know, if you're going to be an actor and you can't do it in LA, you can't do it in New York, you got to go to LA. So I think that's why they ended up there.
Makes sense.
But so they say this happened in 1964, 65. I don't know what they did between 65 and when I was born in 69. But all of this time, they're posing as a normal couple, but this is only 3 or 4 years old to them. This stuff is not, you know, way in their past. So by the time I'm 5, 6 years old, yeah, this is 10 years ago, but 10 years ago can come back to haunt you if you're dealing with the mafia stuff and also all these legal issues, the way the police might want you. There might be warrants for your arrest. You can't go back to New York City, even though that's where you're from, because you might be arrested. So at the time you're born in 1975, we don't know any of this. Right. And my mother pretends that she's a perfectly normal housewife. And I remember her taking me to brownies and to Girl Scouts and to all of this stuff. And I don't think there was any talk of who she was. She would have told us that she had never stolen anything in her life and that she was a good Catholic girl and she didn't know what we were talking about. Okay, so the reason that I think we're telling all this story, so my mother and father ended up in California, and I'm sure there was still chaos. They moved from Los Angeles to Ojai. They had 4 girls in 6 years. And by the time I was born, we were back in Los Angeles, then back at a ranch, and we still moved a lot, but there was always a steady income.
And I was born in Van Nuys, so we were in the valley at that point.
Yeah. Oh, Yeah, we were born on Archwood Street in Van Nuys. So, and there is a lot of back and forth and a lot of, but there was always an income. As you were saying before, Dad did well at his job. He liked working in TV and behind the scenes and working in, he worked for KTTV, which is a movie studio, and it became Fox TV and everything else. And he loved it. And he liked
Yep.
going to work every single day. He always worked overtime. It was steady. And my mother spent more money than he could
If
make.
you're ever in Los Angeles or in Los Angeles, there used to be a building. I think it's still there. It was a building that had stairs up to the stars. And that was the Fox TV building. So I was very proud of him growing up that he worked at Fox TV.
Yeah, it was fun. And it was good to know that he had a real job. And the reason we're telling the story, though, is because this is how we didn't understand where we came from, I think, at first. And when the whirlwind and the kind of chaos of moving from place to place to place, and when my mom had us on her own, I don't think we understood who my mother was or where this had come from, because my entire childhood, up until I was 10 years old, we believed that my mother and father were nice, normal, steady people. My father held down a nice, normal job, and my mother was a nice Catholic girl from New York who would never steal from anyone. She took us to church. She was kind. She liked to bake cookies. And on the next episode, we're going to talk about what happened once my father left and we actually moved from place to place.
Spoiler alert, their marriage didn't end well.
I don't think anything could have ended well with these two.
Right?
But one thing I wanted to kind of touch on was, what do you think about Mom and remorse and how she felt about Marilyn and about, she always used to say that her crimes were victimless crimes, that either it's just money and you're only defrauding insurance companies, so it doesn't matter, or nobody's getting hurt. She would never hurt somebody. So this kind of tells a different story looking at it from Marilyn's perspective instead of from Mom's.
Right. I mean, it's funny. It's only recently that I've begun, and I don't know why only recently, but I've been thinking about Marilyn a lot in the past couple of years. Just how she dodged a bullet. You know, it's probably, and I know that she loved my father very much and our mother. But he wasn't a great guy to be married to. And I think that Mom showed no remorse, and Mom did not consider Marilyn at all. She just didn't even consider her. Like she was a non-issue because Mom was very intense when she wanted something. And if she wanted something, there was no getting her way. And I think that she just saw Marilyn as in her way to get to it. Even though he wasn't hers to have, she saw him as a prize to be won.
Well, the story we got is that the night my mother met my father, she was at a bar.
Yep.
And she saw my father, and that was it. She was going to have him. It didn't matter that he was married. None of it mattered. She was willing to drug him to keep him away from Marilyn. She was willing to fight Marilyn over him. All of this. I mean, what kind of woman?
I had to stay home with me when I was thinking about going out with his friends. I'm like, no, let me just drug you so you don't go out.
Can you imagine saying
that life?
That I want your wife to be mad at you and throw you out, so I'm going to drug your coffee so that you end up sleeping here overnight. And that's the basis to start a life with 4 little girls. And
that's so far from the mom that I know, like that I knew growing up. That thinks that she did this kind of thing. And obviously I'm laughing at it. No, she drug their husbands. I mean, unless they're assholes. But
I was just gonna say it depends on the husband.
Yeah, it depends on the husband. It's such an interesting thing to me, this whole thing. Like it seems like someone else's life. I can't believe this mother with her.
Well, one of the things I think that still resonates with me, and I never like to admit where I line up with my mother and where I am like my mother, but I think the ability to compartmentalize things and to say, I am able to do something bad in the pursuit of something good, and to convince yourself and rationalize that it is perfectly okay to do this. I think that's something I have a lot of and that I have to fight all the time, because I would really, if I did not have Mark around, I might not be quite the
that's hereditary, because I have the same exact gene, and I know that I can rationalize anything. If I had to murder somebody, I'd be like, oh, well, there's a certain good reason I had to kill him.
Yeah, I mean, I would have I would
I,
have no remorse over it. If
yeah,
I believed, if I could talk myself into anything, and the ability to say, well, Marilyn doesn't matter, only this matters, and laser minded focus on your goal, whether the goal is a good goal or a bad goal. If the goal is to get the man and keep him at all costs, she did it.
thankfully, I've been able to
Essentially.
funnel my laser driven focus into my career and been able to like have something great out with sales. And it's been great for me as far as you know,
I have been
say,
able to focus it into 12 or 14 completely useless hobbies and obsessions
yeah, there's that.
that nobody else has any use for and that absolutely make no money and that don't have any actual value in real life except to me. So if you want to make a stained glass window or know how to knit an intricate sweater, but only one kind that like you can't actually translate that into knitting lessons or anything. And if you want to know how to get your kid into college, that's it. That's what I know how to do. And I think the world is lucky that I haven't translated that into how to murder your husband or how to escape from the mafia. I
If you're
think
having
that's
supply
good.
chain issues in your electronic component situation, I am your girl. I mean, just tell you, that's what I do. I do it well. I'm great with supply chain. That's my life. So I
So
think we're
yeah, I
gonna
mean,
wrap this up pretty quick, but
but anyway, I think that that is an interesting. I think it's always kind of good to look and see when we start telling these stories about mom
right.
to see what the background was, because without that, it just sounds like she just went crazy. You know, dad left and she went nuts. We're like, oh no, she actually just went back to who
Oh,
she was before.
this is an onion. I mean, this is layer after layer after layer
Yeah.
of trauma and bad decision after bad decision with some good decision and a bad decision. And it's yeah, this is a little she's an onion.
Yeah. All right. So I think we are going to wrap it up for this episode. And thank you for listening to Forever Wild.
And as always, if you've enjoyed this episode, let us know. Find Meagan on Facebook. I'm probably have my Facebook account shut down at this point, but you know, let us know. I'm sure you'll be able to find me too. We do have an Instagram and we have our Facebook account, so you're welcome to reach out and let us know what you think. As always, if you knew our mom, send us your stories.
We would love to hear from you. We'd like your questions, your thoughts. We want to know what resonates and what we want to hear more about.
All right. Until next time, stay wild.
Bye.
Bye.